America's top fighter had a fatal flaw: range. From Guam, an F-22 couldn't reach the fight without a tanker. China built missiles to kill those tankers. A perfect trap. But the Air Force had a secret. A new jet, flying for years, over 1,000 nautical miles of combat radius, no tanker needed. The F-47 just broke cover, and it rewrites the entire Pacific equation. The question now, what else has been flying in the dark? This is the F-47, a 6th-generation fighter designed to operate over 1,000 nautical miles from base without tankers. That single capability dismantles the cornerstone of China's Pacific defense strategy. But the jet's range isn't the real revelation, it's the timeline. Because while China paraded its new J-36 and J-50 prototypes, the F-47 had already been flying for years in absolute secrecy. To understand why the F-47's mere existence is so destabilizing, you have to rewind 2 decades. The year is 2005. The F-22 Raptor enters service as the most advanced air superiority fighter on the planet. Stealth, sensor fusion, supercruise, it was built to dominate the skies over Europe against a near-peer adversary. But it carried one fatal compromise that no one publicly discussed: range. On internal fuel, the Raptor's combat radius tops out at around 530 nautical miles. From Andersen Air Force Base on Guam, the key U.S. staging hub in the Western Pacific, the distance to the Taiwan Strait is over 1,500 nautical miles. The math was brutal. An F-22 could not reach the fight without air-to-air refueling. It had to rely on a fleet of lumbering tankers, airborne gas stations that are slow, massive, and impossible to hide from radar. China's military planners noticed. They didn't need to build a jet that could outmaneuver an F-22, they just had to strand it. Beijing poured billions into anti-access area denial systems. They developed the DF-21D and DF-26 anti-ship ballistic missiles, hypersonic weapons designed to hunt aircraft carriers, but those same sensors and launch chains could easily target tankers. The kill chain was simple. Radar detects the tanker orbits, a missile launches, and suddenly, American fighters are drifting over open ocean with nowhere to land. The Pentagon's most sophisticated weapon system was reduced to a glider with a ticking clock. Inside the Air Force, this nightmare scenario wasn't hypothetical. War games repeatedly showed that a conflict over Taiwan would begin with tanker decimation. Yet for over a decade, there was no public answer. Analysts debated, budget watchers questioned the next generation, but behind a wall of classification, something was already happening. In 2015, the Air Force quietly launched the Next Generation Air Dominance program. And by 2019, a full-scale technology demonstrator was flying, not a computer model, a real aircraft burning real fuel, logging hundreds of hours in the desert skies. While China prepared its trap, the United States was already building the key that would unlock it. That secret jet would later become the F-47, and what those early test flights validated sent a shockwave through the entire defense establishment. What those early flights proved wasn't just a marginal improvement. The test data showed a combat radius exceeding 1,000 nautical miles on internal fuel. That figure alone rewrites the map of the Western Pacific. From Guam, the F-47 can reach the Taiwan Strait and return without ever seeing a tanker. The same anti-access missiles designed to cripple an F-22 strike package now have no target. Beijing spent 20 years and tens of billions of dollars perfecting a kill chain aimed at lumbering tanker orbits. And the F-47 simply removes that link from the chain. The trap snaps shut on empty air. But the range number only makes sense when you understand the engine underneath it. The F-47 is powered by the Pratt & Whitney XA-103, an adaptive cycle engine that operates like 2 different power plants stitched into one. At cruise, it reshapes its internal airflow to sip fuel with the efficiency of a commercial airliner. When threats appear, the engine reconfigures in seconds, redirecting bypass air into thrust channels and unleashing a surge of combat power without needing fuel-guzzling afterburners. The official numbers are staggering. 25% better fuel efficiency, 20% more thrust than any fighter engine in service today. That's the core of the range advantage. The jet doesn't need to drag a fleet of tankers behind it because the engine itself behaves like a flying gas station, and yet propulsion alone isn't the full shock. What makes the F-47 genuinely terrifying to an adversary is that it doesn't fly alone. The aircraft is designed from cockpit to tail as a quarterback for autonomous drones called collaborative combat aircraft. Picture this: a single F-47 penetrates contested airspace, but arrayed around it are 4 or 5 loyal wingmen, each carrying additional missiles, electronic warfare pods, or sensor arrays. They spread across miles of sky, feeding the pilot a god's eye view of the battle space while creating multiple false targets for enemy radars. If a surface-to-air missile locks on, a drone can intercept the shot, sacrificing itself to preserve the manned asset. The F-47 never even banks. Its air combat turned into a tactical chess match where the opponent sees only pawns. Then, in March of 2025, the corporate drama exploded into the open. Boeing, a company fighting intense public scrutiny over civilian aircraft failures, beat Lockheed Martin for the $20 billion development contract. Inside the industry, this was an earthquake. Lockheed had built the F-22 and the F-35, the foundation of American air dominance. Boeing hadn't built a new fighter from scratch in decades. The decision reflected the Air Force's belief that Boeing's digitally engineered prototype had leapfrogged the incumbent. But the price tag is brutal. Estimates place each F-47 at over $300 million per airframe, and that number carries heavy baggage when the manufacturer is also trying to fix production line chaos on the 737 MAX. Yet perhaps the most disorienting detail is the one China never saw coming. In December 2024, Beijing paraded 2 6th-generation prototypes, the J-36 and J-50. Before the world's cameras. State media called them proof that China had seized the future. But what they didn't know is that by the time those jets were taxiing for their public debut, American X-planes for the F-47 had already been flying for over 5 years in complete secrecy. Hundreds of classified flight hours had validated the design, the engine, the stealth coatings. China showed the world a concept. The United States responded by revealing it had already built and flown the operational standard. The gap wasn't closing, it had widened in the dark. That revelation changes everything about how we understand the balance of power, and it leads straight into the hardest question yet. Can the F-47 deliver on its impossible promise? Or is the Pentagon betting $300 million a copy on a company that can barely hold its own production lines together? But the range is only the headline. Buried deeper in the classified test data is a number that breaks every known rule of stealth aviation: sustained speed. For decades, engineers believed that Mach 2 was a hard ceiling for any fighter that wanted to remain invisible. Push beyond it, and aerodynamic friction heats the skin so intensely that radar-absorbing coatings begin to fail. Structural composites warp, and the infrared plume from afterburners lights up the aircraft like a signal flare across the night sky. The F-22 could sprint to Mach 2. 25, but it couldn't live there. The F-35 tops out well below Mach 2 entirely. Speed and stealth were considered incompatible trade-offs, and every air defense system on the planet was calibrated around that assumption. The F-47 shatters that assumption. Test pilots have confirmed that the adaptive cycle engine doesn't just sip fuel at cruise. When it shifts into high thrust mode, the jet sustains speeds beyond Mach 2 without relying on afterburners. New ceramic matrix composites in the turbine blades and leading edges tolerate temperatures that would cripple older airframes, while advanced nanostructured coatings maintain electromagnetic absorption even under extreme thermal loads. The aircraft doesn't just fly fast in short bursts. It cruises at velocities that render entire generations of missile intercept calculations obsolete. A fighter arriving at Mach 2 Plus doesn't give an air defense network minutes to react. It compresses the kill chain into seconds, the time it takes for a radar operator to blink, for a command center to authenticate a track, for an interceptor to scramble. By the time the alert reaches the right screen, the F-47 has already delivered its payload and reversed course. This isn't just air superiority, this is temporal dominance, the ability to dictate the clock. And yet, that brutal capability now rests on Boeing's shoulders at the worst possible moment. The company is still absorbing billions of dollars in losses from the KC-46 tanker program. The 737 MAX failures and repeated Starliner delays. Production line quality control is under the harshest scrutiny in its history. Now, the Pentagon has entrusted Boeing with a $300 million per unit airframe that must be built to tolerances never before attempted in mass production if the adaptive engine ceramic turbines arrive with hairline cracks. If the stealth coatings start delaminating after 50 flight hours, if one of the collaborative combat drones fails mid-mission and leaks a kill chain back to the manned jet, the entire concept collapses, and China won't stand still waiting for Boeing to fix its assembly lines. Beijing's response to the F-47 is already taking shape. The J-36 and J-50 prototypes flying over Chengdu and Shenyang are not static displays. They represent not one but two competing sixth-generation designs, a dual-track development strategy that suggests China is betting on quantity and iteration speed. Intelligence assessments now project that an operational Chinese sixth-generation fighter could enter squadron service within 4 years of the F-47's own deployment, drastically narrowing the window of asymmetric advantage. If Boeing's deliveries slip, if the price per unit triggers congressional budget caps, if the final fleet size shrinks to a fraction of what strategic planners need to cover both the Pacific and European theaters, then the entire two-decade bet unravels. The F-47's superweapon status depends not just on what it can do in the air, but on how many America can actually afford to park on the tarmac. That cold arithmetic of production timelines, fiscal constraints, and adversarial adaptation converges on a single stark scenario that keeps war planners awake at night, because one day, the testing will be over, the production lines will either deliver or they won't, and a pilot will seal the canopy on a combat-coded F-47 at the edge of a contested sea. The mission will not care about budget debates. It will only answer one question: does the jet work? That question will be answered sooner than most realize. By 2033, the first operational F-47 squadron is projected to stand alert at Andersen Air Force Base on Guam. Picture the scenario: tensions in the Taiwan Strait spike. A carrier strike group moves into position. And in the pre-dawn darkness, an F-47 pilot seals the canopy over a cockpit that looks more like a command center than a traditional fighter. The adaptive engine spools up, the bypass airflow reconfigures, and the jet lifts off with no tanker rendezvous on the flight plan. It pushes supersonic within minutes, accelerating to sustained speeds beyond Mach 2, while the stealth shaping and thermal management systems keep it invisible to coastal radar arrays. On board, the pilot can see the entire grid. Wingman drones are already airborne, dispersed across a 100-mile front, sharing sensor feeds and jamming enemy bands. Somewhere inside the Chinese kill chain, operators are staring at empty screens. The DF-21D batteries are primed. The surveillance radars are sweeping. They're looking for the tanker orbits, the unmistakable signature of large, slow aircraft orbiting at predictable altitudes. But the tankers never appear. The F-47 has bypassed the trap entirely. It enters the contested zone at a velocity that compresses the defensive timeline to seconds. A surface-to-air missile battery tries to lock, but one of the loyal wingmen has already spoofed the radar with electronic noise. Before a launch command can be authenticated, the F-47 releases its payload, banks sharply, and reverses course. It exits the threat ring before any interceptor can even scramble. The entire engagement, from entry to exit, takes less time than what a 1990s-era strike package would have spent just refueling. That sequence is not science fiction. It is the explicit operational logic the F-47 was designed to execute. And it represents the structural fix to a problem that has haunted the Air Force since the end of the Cold War: the tyranny of distance over the Pacific. For the first time, a fighter carries strategic bomber range with the penetrating agility of a stealth platform. The tanker-centric model that defined American air power projection for half a century no longer applies. But the final surprise isn't the speed or the range, it's the digital backbone underneath it all. The Air Force has adopted what it calls a digital century series approach. Unlike past programs that locked in a single design for decades, the F-47's open architecture systems allow for continuous hardware and software upgrades, a new engine variant, an improved stealth coding, a more autonomous drone logic package can be inserted without redesigning the entire airframe. That means the F-47 that enters service in 2033 will not be the same aircraft flying in 2040. The platform evolves in competition with the threat, not in response to it. That singular insight redefines how air power is built and sustained, and it points toward a future where the question is no longer whether America can maintain air superiority, but how many times it can reinvent it before the rest of the world catches up, and that reinvention is already underway. The F-47 is not simply a new jet, it is the end of an era defined by tanker dependency, by the slow choreography of refueling tracks, by the vulnerability those tracks invited. It closes a strategic gap that China exploited for 20 years. But the underlying lesson is larger than any single airframe. The next conflict will not reward the nation with the most advanced prototype on a test flight. It will reward the one that can iterate fastest, build at scale, and adapt in real time. The F-47's digital backbone, its modular architecture, its drone integration, these are not features. They are a declaration that the platform is alive. If you want to see what the future of air combat looks like, subscribe now. We are tracking every development as the first squadrons take shape. Thanks for watching.